This high school's special education teacher is no longer smiling in a shocking case of alleged sexual abuse of students. Her name is Nadia Horn, and you can see the emotion on her face in her mugshot. She is accused of sexually abusing not just one, but two students at her school. And just wait until you hear the words she allegedly used to describe what she did. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. All right, guys, real quick, I want to talk about a very serious and important topic. It's something you might think about as you watch some of the stories that we cover here on Law&Crime, and it's life insurance. I know it's not fun to think about, but this year, you can take care of the important stuff. Having a policy means your family has protection and peace of mind, and it doesn't have to be complicated or time-consuming. Fabric by Gerber Life is term life insurance that you can take care of today. It's made for busy parents like you, online, on your schedule, right from your couch. You can be covered in 10 minutes with no health exam required. So if you have kids, especially if you're young and healthy, the time to lock in low rates is now. Fabric offers policies that are high quality and flexible to fit your family's budget. Plus, there's no risk with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Join thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. You can apply today in minutes at meetfabric.com/OTC. That is meetfabric.com/OTC. These cases are always shocking. And one theme that I have seen in a lot of them is when a teacher who is accused of sexual abuse comes forward and we start to learn a little bit about the interactions that they had with their students, you see that this teacher really went across the line in the relationship before the sexual abuse and doing things that went beyond their professional title of being a teacher in a classroom. Now, that is allegedly the case that we're dealing with here, involving a teacher named Nadia Horn. She is 22 years old, and she teaches for the public school system in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is right along the Minnesota border. Now, it appears that Horn is a recent graduate of North High School. There's a post actually on the school's Facebook page congratulating her on her graduation back in 2021. After graduating, she then apparently went on to become a teacher at her alma mater. Now, her name is bringing that alma mater a lot of negative attention. Horn is being accused of sexual abuse of two students at North High School. As a teacher, she taught special education and world studies at the school. Now, the criminal complaint in this case is 4 pages long, and it really lays out in detail how authorities built their case against Horn. So let's start with March 20th of this year. So a lot of this stuff, these allegations, they're very recent. Back on March 20th, a detective was notified that Horn had allegedly purchased a cell phone for a student, and it was a student she was seen driving around town with. Now, at this point in the investigation, it wasn't allegations that were sexual in nature, but it was pertaining to inappropriate conduct because it was apparently odd to people at the school that Horn was buying a student a cell phone and also transporting him outside of the classroom. Now, police ended up talking to this student who said that Horn was helping him get to class, and Horn also asked if the student wanted to join her class, and the school actually transferred him into her class in January of this year. Now, you might be starting to see where Horn is allegedly grooming this victim and crossing the line. Now, police say Horn wanted the student to take her number and to add her on Snapchat. And when the student said that he didn't have service on his cell phone, she reportedly went out and bought him a cell phone. And not only that, the student claimed that Horn would ask him to go get food and if he wanted to hang out outside of school. Now, if you think that's odd behavior for a teacher, apparently the victim did as well, because in the criminal complaint, he reportedly described conversations with Horn as, quote, odd and weird. Now, he also told police that Horn would send him, quote, really revealing pictures. Said they weren't nude photos, but again, really revealing in his words. And Horn allegedly sent messages saying that seeing the student at school made her body feel a certain way. Now, the way that this criminal complaint reads, Horn was allegedly relentless in her pursuit of this student. In January, Horn reportedly brought the student to her apartment where they watched television. The criminal complaint goes on to say, quote, Horn continually got closer to him. Victim 1 reported that Horn began laying on him and that he felt trapped. Victim 1 reported that Horn is his second hour and husky time teacher. Victim 1 stated that they did, quote, everything sexual you can do with a person. Victim 1 reported this happened almost every time he went to Horn's apartment. Victim 1 reported that the last time this happened was around 3 to 4 weeks ago. Victim 1 stated all the sexual activity happened in Horn's bedroom. Now, right there, those are very scary and serious allegations from a 16-year-old student. Now, the student allegedly showed police pictures from inside Horn's apartment, and this is obviously where the concerning alleged behavior of this teacher certainly would come with some serious criminal charges on its own. But the student we're talking about is not the only alleged victim in this case. There's a second victim. Police are calling victim 2, and that student, roughly 16 years old as well. And victim 2 spoke with the first victim, and they allegedly said they had similar experiences with this teacher. Of course, all of this at this point are allegations. Now, the first victim claimed that Horn sent him a Snapchat message around 10:30 in the evening on March 24th. That's a Tuesday, a school night, and she was asking him to come over. Horn allegedly said something to the effect of, quote, "I shouldn't be asking you this, but will you come over?" According to police, the next day, the school resource officer went to Horn's apartment where she allowed investigators to come inside. Now, when officers asked Horn if she knew why they were there, she said, quote, "Yeah, school stuff." She said that she had picked students up from a party and had brought them home, and that was a mistake. Horn also allegedly admitted to buying victim 1 an iPhone 14. She said that she reportedly did that to help him out. She claims that she got close to victim 1 because he needed support, and she also said that she gave him, quote, "food and stuff." Now, you can see there Horn is reportedly admitting to having a relationship that seems to be blurring the lines, if not crossing the lines, between student and teacher, but not admitting at that point about any sort of sexual relationship with these students, which is what she's now accused of. But in this interrogation, or at this point just a conversation at her apartment, police say they got a little bit more specific. This is how this then goes. Horn allegedly admitted to having sex with victim 1 3 times. She also admitted on the day that she spoke with investigators that she allegedly sent a selfie to the victim that morning. Now, police go on to write, quote, Horn was asked if she recalled the picture being of a pillow and saying something similar to, "There's room for you here," to which Horn allegedly replied, "Oh yeah, shouldn't have said, yeah." Then, when she was asked if she sent nude photos to the victim, she responded, quote, "Potentially." Now, Horn allegedly told investigators that her relationship with victim 1 started in January of this year. Now, as far as victim 2, Horn allegedly brought him to her apartment as well to give him a ride somewhere. Now, there was a third student there, according to police, but that student is not considered a victim in this case. Horn told investigators that she had sex with victim 2 in her apartment, allegedly, and they had sex twice on 2 separate dates. This is according to this criminal complaint. Now, the last time was allegedly, in her words, last weekish. And in a very disturbing line in this criminal complaint, Horn allegedly told investigators that victim 2, quote, really wanted it. She also allegedly said, quote, that the first occasion she had intercourse with victim 2, victim 1 was also present. And the rest of the description that goes on about the alleged sexual interaction that she had with both students, it's graphic in detail, too graphic to read here, but you get the idea of what these allegations are like. Now, Horn also reportedly told investigators, quote, it just felt mutual, and she didn't feel like she was taking advantage of the victim. She also allegedly gave the boys wine at her apartment because she said they asked for it. Now, Horn may not have allegedly felt like what she was doing was anything wrong, but obviously in the eyes of the law, and I'm sure you as you're watching this, many of the people who are following this story, she allegedly broke some major and disturbing laws. Take a look at her mugshot. You can see the tears in her eyes. She is facing charges of second-degree sexual assault of a child under the age of 16, 2 counts of child enticement, sexual assault of a child by a person who works or volunteers with children, and a count of sexual assault of a child by a person who works or volunteers with children. Now, here's Horn making her first court appearance. This is per WEAU television in Eau Claire. The judge set her bond at $15,000. She posted that, so she's out of jail as this case is moving forward. If she's convicted on the charges that she faces, she could be in prison for up to 40 years. The Eau Claire School District suspended Horn without pay as the investigation continues per News 8 Now in Eau Claire, and she'll next be in court on May 20th. Joining us now to talk more about this case is former sex crimes prosecutor Dan Shore. Always great to have you here on Law and Crime. You look at the allegations against Nadia Horn, this 22-year-old teacher, and what stood out to me is the allegations. It just seems like she was very relentless in her pursuit of these alleged victims. What stood out to you reading through the PC statement?
Well, like many of these cases, this wasn't a one-time incident, according to what she reportedly confessed to the police, and also the other evidence that she wanted to communicate with at least one of the students and bought him a phone so that she could communicate with him, maybe even Snapchat with him, that she had two students. And this is a suggestion that even there's a third student who came to her house, that she saw them outside of school hours at her own residence. So that's a red flag right there, even without the sexual activity that we see. But then the fact that she admitted to engaging in sexual intercourse with two of these students who were both underage. She was a teacher in their school. This is obviously highly concerning behavior.
Well, and it's interesting too, like what led up to these, the alleged sexual acts in this story is that as a teacher, it appears that she took, at least the story from her perspective was she was taking these students under her wing. She ends up, a student had a tough time getting to school, so she's giving that student a ride. The student said that he didn't have a cell phone, so she goes and she buys him an iPhone. What do you make of kind of the actions in these cases that then lead to the alleged sexual abuse like what we have here?
That's a common pattern in the cases I've prosecuted, in the cases I've investigated, where there's some type of grooming behavior where people are, you very rarely do you see someone who preys on younger people just come out and be overtly sexual with them. Usually there's a grooming pattern where they engage in niceties. They might buy them things, gifts, get their trust. Sometimes these younger people need assistance and they're there to support them. So here, this one student needed a phone. I know that it's a very common thing for people that age to want a phone, to feel compelled to have a phone. That's a big issue, and it's a problem with a lot of kids. But here, that the teacher can provide that to him, can show a way to communicate, and provide also sexual interactions that I'm sure were very confusing to someone that age, but also enticing to them, being young, being confused, and being taken advantage of. So those are the parts of the pattern that we see in a lot of these different situations where there's grooming, there's trust building, and then it leads to sexual misconduct.
She is 22 years old. She graduated from the high school, from what we can tell, in 2021. She is in a position of authority as a teacher, but this is not a case. And unfortunately, we've talked about cases where you might have a teacher in their 50s, their 60s, and there's this decades-long age gap. How does the legal system view allegations in cases like this, where the age gap is not as large as it is in some of the other cases we've talked about?
I don't think that's going to be a mitigating factor for this defendant, because she was a teacher at their school. She was in a position of authority, position of trust, and violated that trust. They were both underage. So I think if you took individuals who are outside the school system and one is older than the other, one's underage, the degree of sentencing or the degree of how serious of a crime it is often depends on the age gap. But here, when you have someone in that position of trust and authority who admits to violating that trust and having sexual intercourse in her home on multiple occasions with two students, I don't think that's going to be a mitigating factor at all, that she's closer in age than maybe some other teachers who are much older.
Because you also just look at what she allegedly admitted to law enforcement, because not only did she admit, according to the PC statement, that she ended up having sexual relations with a victim, but she also sent revealing pictures. I think her response was, quote, potentially. Even a line like that. I mean, if you're a prosecutor, and I assume that she had been read her rights, and if even that one response, like, what does that mean to your case?
Well, that certainly corroborates that there was sexual activity between her and these students. When two students are saying, or at least one is saying there was sexual intercourse, another one's saying there was sexual activity, she said that she had sexual intercourse with two students. But when you see evidence of photos, either nude or close to nude photos, sexually suggestive photos being sent from a teacher to a student, there's really no innocent explanation for that. And it corroborates what we already have in her confession to the police, that she was engaged in sexual relations with people, kids, younger underage students who were under her trust because she was a teacher in that school. You mentioned whether she Miranda rights. According to the police statement, she was read her Miranda rights before this confession. We've seen defense lawyers try to challenge statements that were made after Miranda to say that Miranda wasn't properly given. So I'm sure we'll see that at least made as a motion by the defense here if they contest it. But it looks like a very solid case. You have two victims here who she admitted to having sex with when they're underage and they're students in her school. And then, as you said, you have these admissions of photos that were sent from her to them.
And another part that just really stood out to me, not just the what I perceive as alleged just relentlessness in pursuing these students, but then at the same time, like when she's talking to law enforcement, it seems like a very open but almost oblivious to the situation that she's in answers that she's given. Like there's one line here that says, you know, she sent a picture of a pillow allegedly and said something along the lines of, "There's room here for you." And then when police confronted her with that, she said, "Oh yeah, shouldn't have said that. Yeah." And then she also said, "You know, I made a mistake," which it's like mistake. I mean, that's not really a word that describes what's going on here. If all of this is true, like, what did you just make of the way it seems like in her mind, what she was getting in trouble for?
Right. Well, certainly that's the understatement. It's a huge understatement to say it's a mistake. So
Right.
a few things could be going on here. One is this is the police documentation of what she said. So maybe that is exact wording, that there's a recording on a body cam that'll corroborate that, or maybe that's the police memory of what she said and they're phrasing it in the way that they recall. And that could be a big difference. Semantics matter here, but it sounds like there's, at least right now, no dispute that she did admit to that. And she did, it sounds like from the police report and the complaint that she was pretty quick to admit to this conduct, sending the photos, saying that there's room for you here in my bed, things like that. So maybe she didn't fully recognize the seriousness of it, or maybe she did recognize the seriousness of it, but also thought she was caught and she didn't have any other avenue other than to try to take responsibility now that she had been confronted with it. That's another possibility here, that maybe she didn't think anyone would find out, but once they did, she just thought, well, I guess I'm caught and I might as well acknowledge it.
And the context absolutely matters too, because when you look at emotionally where she was when she was in court, and then you look at the mugshot, you can see that, you know, it appears that far more understanding of the situation that she's potentially in here. The other line that's just very disturbing to hear in these cases is that she felt like this was mutual. And she is 22 years old. She is the teacher. They are the students. But even like in the cases that you've worked, I mean, in the mind of the people who are doing this thing, that clearly on the outside, we all sit back and can see that's not okay. Like, how common in their mind do they just believe that what was happening here is not sexual misconduct, which, if this is true, it certainly is.
That's a very common statement that we see from defendants and people who are investigated, where they say, oh, it's mutual. I've seen that in cases with underage students who are much, much younger than this. And also for the victims in this case, often from their perspective, they also think it's mutual at the time, because they have an older person in authority who they trust, who has ingratiated themselves to them. And they think that this is a relationship that maybe they're flattered by in the moment. And sometimes it's only later with processing that the trauma and the violation really becomes clear to them, and it could derail future relations that they have, because this is often their introduction to interactions in a sexual or romantic way, and it's done in a very criminal, violative way. So we see that a lot, where the older person thinks that it's a real relationship, says it's a real relationship, but they are deemed unable to consent under the law, in part for that reason, so that we don't have a court case and an investigation about whether it's mutual. We just say, if you're underage, it is per se not legal to have sex with that person. And then you add the fact that she's a teacher in their school. That's another reason why this is just per se prohibited. And it doesn't matter whether there was mutuality in the sexual interactions.
Well, and she's 22 years old. One of the TV stations in Eau Claire kind of added up the charges, and she could face roughly 40 years in prison if she got, you know, max sentences for each of the charges she's facing. 22 years old, spending a good portion of your life in prison. I mean, that's certainly a possibility here. And I think when you read the PC, like, I mean, these are very serious allegations that she's facing. how does that, and we got a long way to go here, but like, how likely is this a prison sentence kind of case based on what we know police are alleging happened?
Absolutely. I think this is definitely a case that if she's convicted under the facts that we have and the charges that we have, there would be significant state prison time. I would expect at least a decade, maybe more. And I think one way to look at it is also if we flip the genders here and we said this was a man who was 22 and we had two teenage girls who were 16 and the male teacher had sex with two girls who are in his school who are 16, there's no doubt it would be significant state prison. So I think that it's important, and we've talked about this on other episodes of your show, that you don't take it less seriously because it's a girl who is a woman who's the older person and boys who are the younger people.
Because when you look at, and listen, if I was a juror in this case, and that's how, I try to think about it, where, 22, she's from the town, went to the high school there, has family ties. Like I could hear a defense attorney saying that, if you had presented me this PC, and you didn't tell me, the age of the offender or the sex of the offender, I mean, you would look at this, and this is very, very serious and disturbing stuff. I mean, if this was someone in their 50s, I mean, it would be, very disturbing. But I could also see, if she has a defense, like her being this 22-year-old, girl that maybe is playing like aloof, like as a prosecutor, like how much do you factor that into this case, plea negotiations going forward, that like maybe she can come off as a, someone who the jury could feel sorry for if this goes to trial?
As a prosecutor, if I was prosecuting this case and I prosecuted cases like this, I would not be concerned about that because there's so much evidence, according to the complaint here, that you have two victims who have given their accounts. You have admissions by the defendant. You have other indications that she bought a phone and communicated with them and sent images. So I don't think that there's an innocent way to explain all that on her part. If all you had maybe was the word of one of the younger people and she was able to explain things in a way that maybe made her seem more sympathetic, then that might help. But there's such a mountain of evidence here. And also it's so significant that there's more than one victim, because that really shows it's a pattern of being a predator for younger people if she did what she's accused of. And that makes it even more serious because it's not an isolated incident.
And I don't want to get too graphic with this, and certainly the PC is very graphic, but I mean, the fact that it isn't just one victim and the allegations allege that there were two victims involved in the same act, like how does that make things even worse for the situation that she's in?
I think that is another factor because it's not just someone engaging in sexual interactions with her, but also someone's being exposed, according to the complaint, to her having sex with another student while they're there. So that is another level of criminality, that you're being exposed to another crime in front of you, because that is an act of having sex with someone who's underage, and this other student was exposed to that. So that can make it even more traumatic for them to be witness to what is a criminal act. And I think that would also be a factor in sentencing, when the judge ultimately, if there's a conviction, has to look at what kind of sentencing to give here. That would make, I think, a harsher sentence more fair for the victims and also for the defendant.
And I just think as well, and I think it's always important to bring up when we cover these stories, because, they're 16 years old. I think when you're, that age, you can think that stories like this, like it might be cool to be involved. Someone on the outside might look and make any kind of joke about it. But this is obviously a really, really serious case. Like, what type of impact do you see these types of cases have, even in cases where a teacher may not be that much older than a student compared to some other cases, the impact that these victims could feel if these allegations are true, the damage that these types of acts by predators can have on people?
Yeah, people who know me and know that I investigate these kinds of cases, I do hear from people, I wish that happened to me when I was in high school. And I think that comment is not made as much as it was made to me when I started my career about 25 years ago prosecuting cases like this. So I think society has evolved to a point where we recognize the seriousness of someone who's underage, who's male, being traumatized and scarred, sometimes for life, by having sex with someone who's older than them, who may be a female teacher. There's still an attitude in society that on some parts that's not as serious as if it's an older man with a younger girl. But that is changing. And I've seen firsthand from talking to victims of sex abuse who were younger males at the time, with older females. And this really derails and traumatizes them. This is their introduction often to interactions with another person in a sexual or romantic way. And they're learning about it in a very criminal, dysfunctional, toxic, and traumatizing way. And that can impact their ability to have healthy relationships later in life. So this is a very serious issue that is being taken much more seriously than it was when I started my career, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, they certainly do. Former sex crimes prosecutor Dan Shore, always great to have you on Law and Crime. I know you write about these types of cases in your work and you have a book out. What do people need to know about it?
Sure. My novel is called Open Bar. It's about sexual misconduct with underage students at a school. People could go to Amazon or anywhere else where books are sold, or they could look for me on Substack to get more information.
All right, Dan Shore, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Good to talk to you. Thank you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're also now streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.